Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this June 5th, 2019 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. I now welcome board members and advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its recently established Twitter page at edstateboard_NC. For our visitors and online listeners, today's agenda involves our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on action items. I note that June is typically the last month of the school year for traditional calendar schools in preparations for the opening of our alternative scheduled schools. So our best wishes to all of our students and teachers this week and next as they close out or begin a new year. And I also want to extend congratulations to our high school students who are graduating or have graduated and will begin their next steps along their educational journeys or their careers. We wish you the best. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda, and if not, I seek a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Buxton. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamitz. Dr. Townsend Smith?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine? Yes. Ms. Kamnitz? Yes. Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. The agenda is approved. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. And if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Mr. Buxton?
Mr. Chairman, there are two charter schools we will discuss under EICS 3 that are planning dual language immersion programs. I have a consulting relationship with a dual language immersion provider. It is not clear to me that they will be partnering, but out of an abundance of caution and perception, I'm going to recuse myself from the discussion of the MENA Charter School of Lee County and the CE Academy, which would be in Wake County.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. So noted. Any other items on that? Okay, very good. We'll now proceed to our committee meetings, and we'll begin with the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, and I'll call on Ms. Amy White for that committee. Ms. White.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Amy White, and I am the chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee, and I share that responsibility with Jill Kamnitz. We have quite an agenda this morning. Colleagues, if I'll beg your indulgence in the interest of preserving time, which could possibly be a lengthy conversation. I'd like to manipulate the order in which we discuss the items on the agenda. If there's an acceptance of that proposal, then I would suggest that we start with EICS 7 and follow that with EICS 6, which are the two restart application before us. One from Weldon County, that's EICS 7, and EICS 6 is Chatham County. And I believe Dr. Petrie Martin is going to share that information with us.
So good morning to our board members and to all those. Okay. To all those assembled, I think we're going to adjust. So good morning once again, and I have a very brief presentation today for you. As we tend to do, we will bring before you applications that have come from our local school districts regarding restart applications. So last month, just as a refresher, we had 4 applications that came forward from Winston-Salem Forsyth. They had 4 schools, elementary schools, that wanted to do restart. We brought those forward to you for discussion. They did make some adjustments, and then those were brought back to you for approval. And then this month, under discussion, we have Chatham County Schools. They are presenting a restart application for Chatham Middle School. Please note that they have asked for this year, the 2018-19 school year, to be a planning year. And with that being said, they have taken a look at their financial obligations, and that has been discussed with their CFO and their school district. So then they would head into an implementation year for the 2019-2020 year. We also received a restart application from the Weldon City Schools. They also have brought forth an application for their middle school, but they want to do the fast track process and begin their implementation during the 19-20 school year. Both of these, as we generally do, will ask them to submit their budget, which they have done, and conversations are held with their CFO. And then, of course, we know that they have plans within our NC STAR system as well. So these are being brought to you for discussion this month. And hopefully approval next month.
Dr. Petrie Martin, you're off the hook for singing this morning. Board members, do you have questions about either one of these proposals as presented by Dr. Petrie Martin this morning? Thank you very much, Dr. Petrie Martin. Hearing none, we will now move on to EICS 5, Queen City STEM schools to request the increase in enrollment over 30%. And to present this item, I have Dave Machado.
Thank you, Ms. White. Queen City STEM is located in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and they're requesting an increase in enrollment over the 30% that is legislatively allowed. They have been operating since 2015. They are a K-8 school. They've been a B school in Met growth the last 3 years. They are expanding into a high school, adding a 9th grade, which was in their original charter. Their projected enrollment is 556. A 30% increase would be 723 students. They're requesting an increase to 775, which is an increase of 39.8%, which is 52 students above 30% that is legislatively allowed. So that is the amendment request, and CSAB did vote unanimously to recommend it to the State Board.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Board members, do you have questions about this particular request from Queen City? Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Machado. If you'll hang right there, could we go ahead and discuss our action on first read, EICS 2, Westlake Preparatory Academy's request to decrease its year one enrollment projections?
Yes. Westlake Academy is located in Lincoln County, will be located in Lincoln County. They are currently in their 1-year delay. They have had some difficulties with securing a permanent site, so they have secured a temporary location at a local church. The church only capacity does not meet the 615 students that was originally in their charter. So they're asking for an amendment to decrease their enrollment to 187 students for next year. They do have a 1-year lease with the church with an option for the 2nd year if they cannot get their permanent site finished in time. So they do have the ability to be in that church for 2 years.
Board members, questions or concerns about this particular request from Westlake Prep?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Buxton.
just one operational question. 187 is pretty low from enrollment perspective in terms of your budget. And so just ensuring that you feel good about their ability for revenue to meet their expenses. I saw somewhere in there they were looking at raising some money to close the gap. I just want to be sure that you feel.
Right. They have submitted us a revised budget. They are a Charter School USA school,
Right.
so they are willing to put in extra dollars if they have to.
Okay.
Great question, Mr. Buxton. Further questions? Okay, terrific. Let's then switch gears a little bit and talk about EICS 1, which is another action on first read. Mr. Machado, will be back to you. I'd like to call Jay Whalen forward to discuss the applications for this absolutely amazing grant and potential for significant impact on charter school populations. Mr. Whalen, good morning.
Good morning. So I'm Jay Whalen, the program administrator for the NC Access program. Also have Dr. Barbara O'Neill, Jamelia Shahid Allen, Mariama Janae, our team members. We're here to present the first cycle of sub-grant awards for the NC Access program. As we've talked about a number of times now, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction was awarded a federal CSP grant last year of about $26.6 million to support high-quality charter schools to increase the enrollment of educationally disadvantaged students and expand high-quality charter schools around the state. So we are running an annual sub-grant award cycle to award funding to those charter schools, and we just wrapped up our first sub-grant cycle. In February, we received 23 eligible letters of intent, so all of those schools were invited to apply. 12 schools applied across 3 different categories: planning and implementation for schools going into their planning year, implementation only for schools in 1 to 3 of operation, and expansion for high-quality charter schools open for at least 3 years, who have at least a B school performance grade and have met or exceeded growth for 2 of the last 3 years. We also have a replication category, but we didn't receive any applicants for that category this year. So eligible applicants submitted their applications by the March 31st deadline, and every application was reviewed by a review committee of 4 people, including myself, Dr. Barbara O'Neill, and 2 trained external evaluators. All of the evaluators rated and gave comments on each application, and those ratings and comments were used to create an overall recommendation for each charter school. You have all of those individual recommendations and application and evaluation materials on eBoard. So a subgrant that warrants a recommendation for approval provides a high-quality application with a comprehensive plan to serve the needs of educationally disadvantaged students. So some of the specific things that we were looking for were a comprehensive transportation plan, a comprehensive school lunch plan, an education and discipline plan tailored to meet the needs of educationally disadvantaged students, and a strong comprehensive marketing and recruitment plan with the inclusion of a weighted lottery. There's no specific threshold for the weighted lottery that needs to be outlined. What we were specifically looking for was a weighted lottery that affects the enrollment projections of the school. So does the marketing and recruitment plan, is it aggressive and feasible, and is it supported by a weighted lottery to increase the educationally disadvantaged student population in each school? So a couple things before I move into the specific recommendations. Again, you have the full recommendations for each school as well as the application and review materials. Approval of the planning and implementation subgrants is contingent on approval of those charter schools by this board for operation generally. Those 3 schools are schools that are up for approval and will go into their planning year. So your approval of those schools will impact the approval of their subgrant award if they're awarded by this board. Schools that are approved will go through a preliminary budget meeting with our team. So the award amounts that are outlined in the recommendations are the award amounts that the schools they applied for and would be approved by this board. However, we will go through budget meetings with each school to approve the allowability and reasonableness of all the costs. So they are not guaranteed to get that full amount of funding until their budget is approved by our office and the Financial Business Services Division. And then at that initial budget meeting, we will also go over the monitoring procedures for the entire program, so all schools are aware of what they will be held to as part of the program. The last thing I'll note is in the recommendations that you got, schools were given one of 3 recommendations. Schools could either be recommended for approval based on the outcome of their review, conditionally recommended for approval, or not recommended for approval. Schools that are not recommended for approval are encouraged and welcome to apply in future years if they continue to meet eligibility criteria. Schools that are conditionally recommended for approval, we did that for the Charter School Advisory Board because we were seeking guidance from the U.S. Department of Education to award Additional subgrants then were initially outlined in our state application. So particularly for the implementation only, we outlined 2 subgrants in the first year. We felt that we had more than 2 high-quality applications, so we applied for some flexibility from the U.S. Department of Education to award an additional 2. So we are recommending for approval schools that are recommended for approval in the materials you have, as well as schools that were conditionally recommended in the materials you have. So before I jump into the specific recommendations, are there any questions sort of about the background before we move forward?
I do have a
Yes,
quick
Dr.
question.
Archendine.
I read into some of the applications, and you touched on it just a minute ago. If you would expand a bit on implementation only. So what is that? What is being implemented? Implementation only.
So it's the implementation of the program, so it's for new schools that are within their first 1 to 3 years of operation. So they're through the planning period, and there's specific restrictions around how money can be used in the planning period, so that's why it's a different category. But this is for schools in the initial implementation of a school that don't necessarily have some of the data of an expansion school to expand enrollment or grow the school, but they're still in the initial implementation phases of the school program.
Thank you.
Mr. Whalen, the 2 additional applications that you talked to the U.S. Department of Education about, are they included in the sub-grant recommendations that you've included today?
Yes, so they were initially listed on the materials that you have as conditionally recommended for approval, but we will be recommending them for approval of a sub-grant award.
Thank you.
So the specific recommendations, again, we did not receive any applications in the replication category. So in the planning and implementation category, again, this category is for approved schools that will enter the planning year in the 2019-2020 school year. Schools are eligible to receive up to $400,000 in sub-grant funding. We received 5 eligible applications in this category, and the schools recommended for approval are Mena Charter School of Lee County. Mena is planning to serve an 85% educationally disadvantaged student population. And I will say that the federal government defines educationally disadvantaged as students who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English learners, homeless or unaccompanied youth, migrant students, and immigrant students. So when we say educationally disadvantaged, we are encompassing that students. Most of the schools are projecting their enrollment percentages based on economically disadvantaged as sort of a proxy for the larger subgroup.
And so, Mr. Whalen, let me reemphasize for my colleagues, just restating what he mentioned before. Mena Charter is one of the schools that is before us in our discussion for new charter school applications. And so this award would be contingent upon the approval of Mena Charter as accepted by this board.
Right, these first 3 will be contingent on that. Again, Mena submitted a sub-grant application that had a heavy focus on the recruitment of ED students, a strong school culture and discipline plan, a plan to purchase 6 buses to provide transportation, and additionally had a clear professional development plan that supported the needs of ED students. And they scored 83 points on the rubric. As part of the rubric score, an applicant needed to score at least 80 points on the technical standards and meet all of the general standards within the application to be eligible for a recommendation for approval. The next school recommended for approval is Movement East Charter School. Movement East is projecting that they will serve close to a 70% educationally disadvantaged student population. They're proposing to serve a disproportionately high number of English learners based on their location in the East Charlotte community, had a strong school lunch and transportation plan, as well as a curriculum that was tailored to ED students. And they also provided a clear explanation of the funding gap that this grant will support in the implementation of their school. And Movement East scored 89 points on the rubric. And then finally, Wilmington School of the Arts plans to serve a 51% educationally disadvantaged student population. Again, they had a strong school lunch and transportation plan and a clear focus on the professional development of staff tailored to educationally disadvantaged students. And that applicant scored 92 points on the rubric. And then the 2 schools not recommended for approval were CE Academy and the Robert J. Brown Leadership Academy. Are there any questions about the planning and implementation group before we move forward?
Ms. Kamnitz?
My first reaction in seeing two schools on this list that we hadn't, that aren't operating as schools at this point, was concerned about whether or not this was gonna add another level of complexity to to their job to get ready to open. But hearing you speak, is this grant is supported, is gonna be supported for those two schools, Wilmington School of the Arts and MENA, of efforts that they were already gonna make, but maybe weren't sure how they could fully fund their
Yeah, so some of it is.
goal of 80% is 1%.
Right, so some of it is to support the funding gap that happens for a lot of charter schools in the planning year. And a lot of what was referenced in the subgrant application, while it's separate from the original charter application, is a lot of what they were proposing to do. In some instances, schools did make a concerted effort to provide more busing and transportation options and more comprehensive lunch plan, and maybe a little bit more aggressive enrollment plan for ED students that they would use this funding to specifically support. And then some of it was part of their original plan that was in the charter application.
So it doesn't necessarily complicate what they were planning.
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Some of my questions will go over to the other, it'll be readily apparent, would cover all of these, but just looking for the moment first at the Wilmington School of the Arts, one of the three that was discussed. As I look at the scoring rubric, the summary of the evaluation, under technical standards, it's got points possible. It says total must receive at least 80 points to pass. And in other places, it suggests 80 out of 100. And it says points possible, 100 in the total, you'll see there. What I'm struggling with is the rubric here, because the points actually total to 112. And so if you reach 80, it's not 80 out of 100, it's 80 out of 112, because the competitive preference standards column is the additional 12. It's almost like extra credit if we go back to our high school days and hope for something like that. So if you could start by explaining that process, that would be very helpful.
Right, so the rubric was structured, so the technical standards out of 100 points are the enrollment projections and justification, the application narrative, which is a series of 15 questions to outline the implementation of the academic and operational program to support students, the budget narrative, and logic model, which outlines the expenditures and how they will use subgrant funds and how those relate to the goals and outcomes outlined in the application. So that is where the 100 points comes from. The competitive preference standards are there is an optional section, so schools don't have to apply for it, but it is a way for schools that are trying to address certain competitive preference standards, like increased racial and ethnic diversity, implementing a high-quality charter school where there is not a high-quality charter school within 15 miles. I'm blanking on the other two, but applicants can receive up to 3 points per standard by providing additional evidence to address those competitive preferences. So those are not something that applicants have to apply for, but those are some of the things that in our state application that we deemed important as an incentive for schools, particularly in rural communities, for a school that is going to serve, be a high-quality charter school without a high-quality school within 15 miles.
So under that rubric, as I understand it, hypothetically, and I actually think in at least one case this is not hypothetical, but you could only have 80 points out of, or you could have less than 80 points out of the 100, but because, let's just say you happen to have no competitive charter school within 15 miles of where your charter school is, even though you don't otherwise meet the technical standards, you get 3 points for the geographic location of where your school is, and that's enough to then meet the 80-point standard. Is that basically how it worked as you worked together as a group?
So yes, that's correct. But I will say that just scoring 80 points does not automatically warrant a recommendation for approval. That's the level to be eligible for a recommendation. So just scoring 80 points does not guarantee that you will be recommended for approval. Then it comes down to the competitiveness of the application and the strength of the applicant.
Were there any where 80 points were met that were not approved?
Not in this sub-grant cycle, no.
All right. And then, while sticking with Wilmington School of the Arts, and this is just helping me try to understand the rubrics, or how you went about the mechanical process. So I'm looking at what I think is the last, it appears you set out what the individual ratings were of the committee members as part of these materials, and so as it happens, I'm looking at one of the evaluators in this case. In that particular case, they came to 80 points using the 3 points to get for the competitive preference standards. And then below that, they had priority standards and said standards possible 4 and standards met 0, which would indicate, I guess, they didn't meet that particular part of the rubric. Can you explain how that played into the decision making, and first of all, and then second of all, how that category played in decision making? But then second of all, how are the points taken? Because there's some where, even in this application, where they didn't reach 80 points. That is, some of the individual evaluators, even with the competitive preference points, did not get to 80. So how was it that you got the final summary in the front? How did you get to that? Did you just average the individual scores? Did you, and suppose it was 2 to 2, 2 were under 80 and 2 were over 80, did you take the average, and if the 2 that were over 80 brought the total up to 80?
Right,
That's
so
how you got there?
Yeah, so we did average scores across categories to get the final rating for each section of the application. And we did that because, and I'll say just as a caveat, that we are going back and revising our sub-grant application materials, our rubric materials and things for next year to strengthen those and strengthen the approval process and the application process. We did average scores because of some of the subjectivity that comes with any rubric and scoring any application. And we didn't want to set the criteria that just because one external evaluator may have scored it under 80 points that would disqualify an applicant. So we did take an average across all reviews within each section.
Then, well, this may not be one of the 3 you said, so I'll save my questions on that for another one.
And so to address the priority consideration standards, again, those are optional standards that schools can apply for within an appendix. They can provide additional supporting evidence for that. That is used to deter if we had multiple high-quality schools and not enough sub-grants to give out, we would use the priority consideration standards to sort of do some more ranking and give priority preference to the stronger applicants. So those typically apply more to the expansion and replication schools, so schools that already serve a greater than 40% economically disadvantaged student population, schools that are Title I schools already. So those are competitive preferences for schools that are already doing this work really well, to provide priority if schools, if we had more than enough high quality applicants, then sub-grant awards available. So that didn't really come into play this year because we only had 2 eligible expansion applicants for 3 available sub-grant awards. So we didn't have to use, whether they had 4 or none, we didn't have to use the priority consideration standards this year.
All right, I think does answer my questions in this category for now. I probably will have some more when we get to the other category.
Duly noted.
Thank you.
Yep. So in the implementation only category, this category is for schools who will enter their years 1 to 3 of operation in the 2019-2020 school year. Schools are eligible to receive up to $250,000 in sub-grant funding. We received 5 eligible applications for, initially we had allocated 2 sub-grants in this category. As I mentioned earlier, we requested some flexibility from the Department of Education to give out 4 in this category this year. So the schools that are recommended for approval are Team CFA, Bonnie Cone Classical Academy. Bonnie Cone proposed to increase the ED student percentage. They serve until they reach 40% by year 5. The sub-grant application proposed a comprehensive professional development plan and marketing strategy to recruit ED students, and also the school will provide transportation and school lunch services. This applicant scored 90 points on the rubric. The next school recommended for approval is Team CFA Community Public Charter. Community Public is proposing to increase the ED student percentage each year until they serve 45% educationally disadvantaged students by year 5. The subgrant applicant proposed a very similar plan to the Bonnie Cone application and plans to use resources across the network to support the implementation of the program. Again, they had a comprehensive professional development plan, marketing strategy for ED students, and will also provide comprehensive transportation and lunch plans, and they also scored 90 points on the rubric. The two schools originally that were conditionally recommended for approval that we will be recommending for approval are East Voyager Academy. East Voyager is proposing to serve a 48% ED student population by year 5 with a very heavy emphasis on English language learners. This is a dual immersion school in the Charlotte community. They had a strong marketing and recruitment plan as well as an innovative language immersion education plan. The applicant proposed to participate in the National School Lunch Plan. There were some specifics about the transportation plan that do need to be addressed. They will provide transportation, and those are conversations that we will have at our budget meetings later this month. This applicant scored 85 points on the rubric. And then finally, Tillery Charter Academy plans to serve a 50% educationally disadvantaged student population. This subgrant applicant outlined a research-based curricula and transportation plan that was very strong for the rural setting that they're located and existing community partnerships that they have already established. They budget a significant amount of non-CSP funds for school lunch. You cannot use CSP grant funding to buy lunch or kitchen equipment or other things to support a school lunch plan, so they've made a heavy financial commitment in their operating budget for school lunch. And this applicant scored 89 points on the rubric. And then the school that is not being recommended for approval is Next Generation Academy. So I'll pause at the end of that category for questions.
Questions in this category?
I just have them in the order they came in, so I'm not sure what all the schools, could you say all the schools in this category?
So the schools recommended in this category are Team CFA Bonnie Cone Classical Academy, Team CFA Community Public Charter, East Voyager Academy, and Tillery Charter Academy.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Duncan is
Mr.
looking, let me, if I could fill the space. Just a procedural question, it's not a specific one. Given that we have varying percentages of economically disadvantaged students that different schools are looking to get, it sounds like we don't have a threshold we're looking for.
Right, we are looking for the competitiveness of the application in an aggressive recruitment plan tailored to the geographic area. So knowing that schools are serving different populations around the state, where we didn't set a percentage of what the weighted lottery needs to be or what the educationally disadvantaged population of students needs to be. We're looking for, is this an aggressive and feasible plan for the geographic location and the feasibility of the school?
Quick follow-up. Do we look at the economically disadvantaged percentage in the home county or home school district and some relation? So if you wanted to have 20% in a school system that was 60%, does that factor in?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Mr. Duncan has said that he doesn't have questions in this category, but Dr. Oxendine.
Well, you have found your questions, Mr. Duncan?
The questions I would ask in this category I've already asked, so I'm fine, thank you.
I'm very impressed by that notebook. Feeling that
Well, this meeting's so bad, there's 2 of them.
thin file is not competing. Give me an example of an effective marketing recruitment plan. And would that plan, when you are assessing an application, would you expect that plan to be ongoing year to year, twice a year? Just talk about what is an effective marketing endeavor.
So generally what we're looking for is a comprehensive plan that will go on each year and will sort of outlive the life of this grant. So part of the budget narrative is how schools plan to continue all of these operations after the expiration of subgrant funding and how they plan to continue to implement some of these services to support educationally disadvantaged students. So a lot of the things we're looking for was a variety of mediums to reach out to families. So internet-based website or email sort of marketing campaigns, other traditional media, TV, radio, billboards, other things, going out into the communities, specific communities and neighborhoods that the school plans to target for, whether it be door-to-door canvassing or community events, going into local churches or other local community organizations. A lot of schools proposed bringing on or contracting with a Spanish-speaking community liaison or another dual language community liaison to support the needs of English learner families and English learners in the community, translating all documents into the languages that they plan to recruit for students in the community, and just a deep understanding of the community and where these students would come from and how they're going to reach those students.
Thank you very much. That does seem thorough.
And I apologize for coming late, and if this has already been discussed. Could you talk us through the evaluation process for the plans? So in order, of course, you want there to be a robust sort of roadmap for how to achieve these things, and you've outlined some of those details, but how will you go about evaluating to make sure those targets are hit?
So we are in the process of putting in, developing and implementing a comprehensive monitoring plan. So based on what was outlined in each application, based on the goals that applicants put forward, based on federal guidance and some of the stipulations and requirements that will be held to, we will do on-site and desktop monitoring of every school throughout the life of the subgrant. There will be benchmarks and things that need to be hit and monitoring requirements that need to be met along the way. The continuation of funding will be dependent on being in compliance with that monitoring, meeting some of those guidelines and stipulations along the way, and meeting the goals specifically that were outlined as part of the Access program in their application, and goals that are achieving the broader mission of the grant specifically.
I'll interject. One of the questions I was going to ask at the end, but is perfectly appropriate now as a follow-up to yours. If you could explain to the board the grant cycle, how are the funds dispersed? Is it yearly? Is it one lump sum? And then the question about monitoring and making sure that the schools who have been awarded the funds maintain the integrity of the application.
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer additional questions about the monitoring if I haven't answered them already. The grant, we have a 5-year grant from the federal government, and sub-grantees schools will have up to 5 years to expend their funds. So they've submitted a budget to us. We will go through the budget review process with each applicant and approve that budget before they can start using and spending any money. And as I mentioned, as part of the monitoring, we can stop sub-grant funding at any time if they're not meeting any of the goals or requirements or in compliance with any state or federal statutes, requirements, or part of our monitoring procedures. So we can stop sub-grant funding at any time. I don't know if Alexis is here, but in the initial conversations that we've had, this is a reimbursement-based grant. Okay. So they won't get an initial lump sum up front. Sort of the way that we've worked it within the department is that they will be on sort of a monthly allocation that we will collect reimbursement documentation and adjust each monthly as necessary based on the allowability of receipts and invoices and reimbursements that they're submitting to us. So it is on a reimbursement basis. They're not getting a lump sum of money, but we're doing it as regularly scheduled each month as possible, so they have access to funds to support the implementation of the program.
Excellent.
And sorry, just to add on to that, for the planning year schools, you can only expend planning year funds for up to 18 months. So in the event that a school goes into delay or something else happens that delays the opening of a school, there is some measure to stop the funding in the planning period before the school is actually implemented. They would not have access to all of the money in the planning period.
One follow-up question from me, I think Ms. Kamnitz would like to ask a question. Do you have an established process for revocation of a grant in the event that one of these schools in the first 5 years, particularly the ones that are in the planning and implementation, I'm speaking ahead of myself. I understand it's a reimbursement grant, but do you have an established process for revocation or communication process for revocation of funds?
So that will be part of our monitoring and risk assessment protocol that we put in place. There will be different measures and benchmarks to meet throughout the year. And as part of that, we will have specific outcomes and processes related to revocation and stopping a grant and stopping sub-grant funding, whether it be for a period of time until a corrective action plan is put in place, or canceling the rest of the sub-grant in its entirety.
Ms. Kamnitz?
So this is another monitoring question. Just going back to what the grant provides for, it's increasing the number of educational disadvantaged students attending high-quality charter schools. How do you define high-quality charter schools for monitoring purposes? Because we're talking about some schools that aren't even operational yet. So what is the definition of a high quality?
So in our state application, high quality was defined as schools that have at least an A or B school performance grade in at least 2 of the last 3 years, and have met or exceeded growth in 2 of the last 3 years, and don't have any academic, operational, or financial non-compliance issues. So what we're working through right now, and I don't have specifics about the monitoring, but what we're working through is ways for these schools that are becoming operational to set goals and benchmarks from the data that we do have and that we will get, particularly in after the first year, for their academic and operational performance. Obviously, we have the performance framework as outlined by the Office of Charter Schools for the compliance of a school across a number of academic, operational, and financial measures. And then as we start to get school performance data, we'll be able to use that to factor into the process as part of the monitoring part of it. In order to be eligible to apply for schools, they needed to have a B school performance grade and met or exceeded growth in at least 2 of the last 3 years. And for schools that do have data, they needed to have B and met or exceeded growth in each of the 1 or 2 years that they have in order to be eligible to apply in the first place.
Okay, not seeing any further questions in this particular category, the last category of grants that you've recommended for award.
Yes, so the last category is the expansion category, and this is for high-quality charter schools who have been in operation for at least 3 years and are seeking to expand their enrollment, either grade levels or the educationally disadvantaged student population or the overall population within the school. Schools are eligible to receive up to $600,000 in sub-grant funding, and we received 2 eligible applications in this category. So the schools recommended for approval are the Explorer School. And the Explorer School is proposing to expand educationally disadvantaged student enrollment from 22% to 32%. They presented a number of transportation options for students, as well as many current contracts and support services already available, including the community and schools of Wake County. They were able to demonstrate a strong racial equity and diversity plan supported by the board of directors, and an increased community engagement support program for families within the community. And this applicant scored 85 points on the rubric. And then finally, Invest Collegiate Imagine. Invest Collegiate is proposing to increase the educationally disadvantaged student population from 33% to 40%. Their expansion also includes the addition of pre-K, and the applicant provided a strong transportation plan that includes busing for before and after school programs provided by the school. Certain aspects of their budget will be reviewed for allowability, specifically some of there was some playground equipment and some other things that we just need to have further discussions about, but it didn't take away from the strength of the application generally. But this applicant scored 80 points on the rubric.
Questions? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. With respect to the Invest Collegiate Imagine rubric, I would appreciate a little bit of help in better understanding it. The summary sheet shows with the 80 out of 100 points possible on the technical standards, with the benefit of getting 6 additional points out of the competitive preference standards, which you've explained. But then I go and look at the individual ratings, and there was a 65.5, a 77, an 84, and an 86. And if you average those, that's below 80. And so I thought I had understood earlier that you took the average to get to 80, and I can't get there with what I've got in the materials that I've reviewed, and there may be some other explanation, so that's what I would like to try to better understand.
So what I have on the recommendation sheet is that they scored an 8 out of 10 for the enrollment projections, a 43 out of 60 in the application narrative, a 23 out of 30 in the budget, which puts us at 74, and then the 6 points in the competitive preference standards. And I'd have to look at specifically what preference standards they address, but that's how we got to the 80-point threshold.
Well, let me do it this way to make sure we're on the same page. I have, for your scoring sheet, I have 77 for all of the categories. For the next scoring sheet, I have 65.5 for all the categories, and those materials that we have, and that was a scoring sheet of Meredith Flo. Next one, I have 84, which is the scoring sheet of Barbara O'Neill, and the last one I have is 86, which is the scoring sheet of, bear with me for a moment, of Kristen Parker.
So we can go back and I can look at those numbers and I can provide further clarity tomorrow when this action comes up to the board, if that's helpful for people. I can check the math and check how we came to the 80-point threshold for Invest.
And I'm also, was there some other consideration that's not self-apparent simply from numbers? I would certainly want to know about that, and I believe the board would too.
Sure, we can provide additional clarity tomorrow.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions, Dr. Oxendine?
Just a general thought that I'm having right now is, in the review of the application, was there a question asked or a way to ascertain the desire or the goal of the school in terms of targeting and increasing the numbers of disadvantaged students? I mean, prior to, let's say, regardless of the grant opportunity, could you ascertain in any way, or did you make an effort to ascertain through a question or a couple of questions, how ambitious are you in general to target and enroll educationally disadvantaged students?
Yeah, so part of the enrollment projections was, what are you currently projecting for the next 5 years? And then how would this sub-grant supplement or increase or change that? So we were able to see what current projected enrollments schools are looking at and how they are projecting to increase that educationally disadvantaged student population. Regardless of if they get this grant or not, this is what our current 5-year projection looks like, and these are the investments we're making. And then the questions around specifically the rationale behind the enrollment projections is a way for applicants to sort of describe what they were currently planning and how the sub-grant funds are going to just increase the ambitiousness of that plan.
So there was an existing desire to do so?
Correct.
Okay, good.
Questions, Chair Davis?
Mr. Whalen, this goes back to some of your earlier comments. You mentioned things like transportation and food service and things that would meet these students' needs. I may have missed it, but how was social emotional supports and mental health services factored into this decision?
So we had a number of questions around the education plan, the school climate, school discipline plan, other programs and services that are going to be provided to these students. So the application narrative and those specific questions were ways in which a lot of applicants address sort of the wraparound services and other additional services or contracted services that the school will be providing, particularly around counseling, behavioral interventionists, and other services for social emotional learning.
So these schools are beefing up that level of support?
Yes, whether through the grant or through sort of freeing up money by using the grant to put that in their original operating budget, those wraparound services are included in the school's plans.
Are any of these schools using the multi-tiered system of support?
Yes.
All are. Okay, good. And then, similar to Dr. Ostendine's question, so we have a way of knowing how these funds will supplement but not supplant current activities at these schools?
Yes. And that will go back to the monitoring that we're doing, the approval of the budget, and before they can enter a budget into the system and receive any sub-grant funding, that will have to be approved. And we've done preliminary scheduling in the event that these schools are approved to have them in for budget discussions and to discuss the entire application, but talk through the specifics of what they're spending their money on, how they're using it, and how it is supplementing and not supplanting any of their operating funds.
And then just one more general comment, if you grant me some leniency. It seems that the objective of this strategy is to increase the number of educationally disadvantaged students that are attending charter schools, and we're better serving them through charter schools. It would seem that we consider, just in the general charter application process, weighting a preference towards charter schools that are going to help support this goal, and then being somewhat critical of applications that might be going against this goal. And I know there's other goals we have to take into account in considering those applications, but Mr. Machado, I would just offer that as a thought towards how do we accomplish this goal without having to spend, or maybe in addition to spending these dollars that we've been successful at granting. And at least to the extent not make other decisions that go against this objective.
Any other, Mr. Machado, you'd like to respond to that? Yep.
Is that an observation or a question, Chairman Davis?
It was an observation, but I always welcome your advice on my observation.
I will say that I think you've seen the applications that have come before the state board that CSAP has approved over the last several years. They are very intentional on making sure that the ones that do get approved have a good plan to increase economic disadvantage plan. So I think that just the emphasis that CSAP is putting on it moved us a little bit closer. I will say that the CSP grant has definitely moved the needle in the charter school community more than anything else that's happened probably in the last 20 years to put a higher emphasis on economically disadvantaged students, lowering the barriers for all students, and having a way not only to transport them, feed them, but educate them too, because part of this grant goes to curriculum that is used to educate the population that some of our schools might not be serving as well.
Mr. Buxton?
If I could, I just wanted to, on one hand, express my appreciation for the Office of Charter Schools and the department in applying for this grant and making this a high priority for the office, and clearly better reflecting the students coming into our public schools is a high priority for this board and the department. But I appreciate the work and diligence on this. And I hope that we see more, as you've defined it, high-quality charter schools take advantage of some significant resources. It's a little disappointing to see 2 expansion sites, given the opportunity that's available to them. And it may be that it's the first year. It may be that we got to coach some folks to want to serve this population more, but I appreciate the work that you all are doing very much.
Excellent, thank you. I echo Mr. Buxton's sentiments. I know that was an arduous process to vet those applications with thorough review. Thank you for the time that you took to bring those forward to us today. I heard one request for additional information, and if you'll bring that back to us tomorrow, that would be terrific.
Sure.
Thank you. Great discussion, board members. Thank you, Mr. Whalen and team. So we've got 2 items left to tackle this morning. Let's go ahead and discuss EICS 4, NC Virtual Academy's request to increase enrollment by 20%. And I believe Mr. Machado is coming back to the podium to walk us through that particular discussion.
Thank you, Ms. White. And before I move on to that, may I take the opportunity to celebrate what we just discussed in front of the State Board and thank Mr. Whalen and his team for outstanding job. This is a very monumental occasion for North Carolina to be given this grant, and then implementing them has been even more difficult, I think, than getting. We said in our office when we did get notice that we got accepted, it's like the dog was chasing the car. We caught the car, now what do we do with it? But Jay's team's definitely done a fantastic job doing it, as has my entire staff. I want to thank my entire staff for filling in for me last month when I wasn't here. I was at a resort called Wake Med North, and I appreciate it. I want to thank them for doing a great job. Okay, North Carolina Virtual Academy is one of the 2 virtual charter schools that were granted a pilot. And Senate Bill 99 extended the pilot another 4 years to 2022 through 2023 school year. Legislation did cap the enrollment of virtual charter schools at 2,592 students. State Board of Ed does have the ability to waive that maximum student enrollment beginning the 4th year of a school, which they are in their 4th year. General Statute 115C 218.7 does allow a low-performing charter school to grow up to 20% annually without state board approval. Currently, NCVA's enrollment is 2,425 students. The school is asking to be treated like any other charter school and be allowed to grow up to that 20%. Currently, this virtual charter school is in 97 out of 100 counties in the state, and they are in 111 out of 115 LEAs. And CSAB did unanimously recommend to allow NCVA to increase their enrollment up to 20%. That is the amendment before you.
Thank you for that information. Colleagues, questions about this particular request? Mr. Buxton?
2, thank you.
2
Just
questions.
clarifying
Not
questions.
3, 2.
2. 1, if I'm a low-performing charter school in North Carolina, not virtual, I can apply to increase up to 20%, correct?
A low-performing charter school,
Not virtual.
non-virtual, can grow up to 20% without state board approval. That is in legislation. Anything above that would require state board approval.
Okay. And then my second question is a budget-related question, which is just in general, when we're in the midst of the budget process for the biennium. And so as we think about additional students, and especially with the virtual school, where we may see folks not coming from our traditional public or traditional charter, they may. How we account for that in the budget process, is it a small enough number that it's gonna true up because within the state public school fund we can manage it? Or is this something that we've gotta make sure if we pass this, that the General Assembly understands to build into additional ADM?
20% of 2,500 is
500.
significant, yeah, significant number. Are you asking if NCVA's budget, or are you asking about DPI?
I just know as we do demographic projections, we kind of get a sense of how many students will probably show up in our traditional publics the next year. We know what our charter school population is and what their projections are. This is late in the game, and so I'm just trying to understand, again, it's clarifying how, given that this population is more likely to come not from internal churn, but potentially outside, just how we account for this in the
I would think
budget.
that'd be Michelle's question.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but if this amendment is approved, obviously, the information will be given to FBS, and they will determine what the budget impact would be.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Appreciate that, Madam Chair. Mr. Machado, could you, I know this is categorically considered a low-performing charter school, but could you qualify that some? Could you refresh our memory on what has been the performance of NC Virtual?
They have been a D school since their inception, and they have not met growth all 3 years. And again, the definition of a low-performing charter school as it stands right now is a D or an F, and is either not met or has met growth.
Right. And I know this is somewhat experimental, right? I mean, there are 1 or 2 virtual charters, right, in this pilot.
It is a pilot.
From your vantage point, what was the sense of sort of the calculus behind the unanimous referral for the expansion of 20%, given that it's been perpetually low-performing? And D since its inception?
That's a great question. I think that Office of Charter School and Charter School Advisory Board has always tried to treat the virtual charter schools as regular members of our portfolio, and we want to, whatever the rules are for charter schools, we'd like to have them apply to even the virtual charter schools. So that was the thinking behind a unanimous recommendation, and it is a pilot, and we want to see could they continue.
Do you think that the pilot and the virtual nature of it has anything to do with the low performance, given like certainly the transient nature of the population, right? That they're not in a brick and mortar building. You have students sort of vacillating in and out. Do you think that has something to do with the performance?
I think it does, and I think data shows that our charter schools within the first 5 years do not perform as well when they get into their 5 and above. We have data that shows that schools that have been around a little longer, their data is much stronger. They understand what they're doing a better job at it. They're making the adjustments they need to make. So I think the fact that they're in the first 4 or 5 years has been a reason that they haven't been getting out of that low performing category yet.
Okay. And I'll just be transparent. The question I have is, on the face of it, I understand the impulse for them to want to be treated as any other charter, but given the pilot nature and experimental approach, I mean, they're categorically not any other charter, right? And so I guess I question sort of the unanimity around the idea of expanding an additional 20% when there isn't a proven track record, right? They're in an experimental phase, and without the proven record of success, some of that, it's hard for me to compute. Appreciate your answering, so.
Ms. Kamnitz?
This is their 4th year, or
Yes.
so looking at the data, is it sort of flatline? I mean, you said they've been D and no growth for the last 3 since inception. Is there any sign of improvement at all?
Yes, the first year their school proficiency was 44.5. It did dip to 41.6, but then went back up to 47.9. So they have made some improvement from the first year to last year. And their growth was first year was a negative 16.36. The second year was negative 9.46, and last year was a negative 6.75. So we are seeing progress. We're seeing trends in the right direction. We obviously want to see them get to a C and a B, but we are seeing some positive trends.
Do you break that out? Is it broken out by grade?
No, it is not.
No,
No.
it's just K-12.
Right.
So you have no sense of where the strengths and
No, but we can get that information for you if you'd like.
That, to be fair, that is one of the questions that we talked about in our subcommittee meeting about how data for both of our virtual charter schools is disaggregated and how it's presented and how are we capturing the transient number of students that maybe are with the school for 3 months and then are moved on to another source. And by and large, the recognition that this particular vehicle provides an opportunity for students who either A, do not do well in a traditional brick and mortar classroom, or B, need an opportunity for access to quality education because they are not able to go or attend a brick and mortar. And so wrapping our heads around that kind of data would better educate and better influence how we deliver the different academic opportunities at each particular grade level.
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Connected to that thought, because I would like to know, did I hear you say 49% proficiency at this stage, at the most recent data? It's not bad, but I would like to know, I mean, proficient, growth, no growth, oh, okay, we can do better there. But what I'm thinking, what I'd like to know, and you're hitting on it, Ms. White, I'd like to know what content area is impacting no growth. Is it ELA? Is it in high school? You would have other EOCs there to consider, but in like the 3, it just needs to be disaggregated so we can ask better questions.
We can provide that.
And to be fair, we did talk about perhaps in August or September having a better more robust discussion about what's going on in these schools and how we might further gauge or support the particular opportunity that this affords our students that don't perform well in the traditional classroom.
That's a huge, what we're talking about now in terms of not having clear information to ask questions is a huge black box we're in.
Ms. Cam next.
And I would just add that as we go forward with NC Connections, with the heightened scrutiny that this is gonna be important information to have for them
Yes.
as well.
Yes, and that is something that we have talked about with that school when we met with them. And Dr. Oxine, their performance for 2017-18 was 47.9.
Proficient.
And we're obviously talking about North Carolina Virtual Academy, not NCPPS, correct? Okay.
Right.
Further questions? Thank you very much. So the last item on our agenda today are the recommendations for approval for the charter schools to open in 2020. Board members, first of all, let me pause. We requested an enormous amount of work and information from a staff of very few team members. I want to pause now and recognize that work for the additional, it wasn't a burden, it was an opportunity to share information, but a very great group of team members pulled together to provide all the information that you have that's been posted on eBoard. Thank you, Mr. Machado, and your entire team for doing that work, and a special nod to CSAB for the work that you do in order to get us to this point. I do believe Mr. Walker's in the audience. So there's a PowerPoint that is included below. Board members, for the discussion portion, what I'd like to do is to maybe have me glance around the table and have you recognize the school for which you have questions. That will allow us to shorten the discussion. So if you had a question about Wilmington School of the Arts, you would tell me that, and then we'll take those in order, and that'll help Mr. Machado answer rather than sort of jumping from one to the other. Is that an amenable solution to a very large conversation? Okay, great.
Ms. White, you said, excuse me, you said there was a PowerPoint, I'm assuming a PDF, I see a bunch of PDF.
I'm sorry, yes,
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something.
Okay, so sorry.
That's okay.
Mr. Machado?
This was discussed in length at the last meeting, so I'll briefly do an overview. I do want State Board to know that OCS received 35 applications this cycle. They conducted clarification interviews. 24 of these applications were allowed for a full interview. CSAB is recommending 12 applications out of the 35 to move into the ready-to-open planning year. CSAB interviewed these applicants in October of 2018 to April of 2019. So again, I think CSAB needs to be thanked for their hard work in presenting a good slate of candidates for you. And I'm happy to answer any questions about any of the schools that you might have. I'll do my best to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. Okay, board members. Do we have anyone that has a question about Wilmington School of the Arts? Mena Charter School of Lee County. Revolution Academy in Guilford County. Elaine Riddick Charter School in Perquimans County. Robert J. Brown Leadership Academy in Guilford County. Mr. Duncan.
I do have a question about that one, and I do appreciate how much work you were asked to do, and pulling this all together is representative of some really outstanding effort on the part of people on staff. But I was sort of interested where you got the capacity figures from. I'm assuming you went to the districts, and the districts were giving you back capacity numbers on the surrounding schools?
Yes, we went to the local district LEA for that information.
Okay. So happen to have fairly unique knowledge on the capacity of those schools, and the capacity numbers are actually overstated. And I won't go down the long list, but that would make your capacity percentages look like there's more capacity in the local traditional schools than there actually is. And I think that's just important to put it into some kind of framework of whether or not there's a greater need. Now, I can give you a number of examples, but Guilford Elementary School, for example, was recently built. I was there every month for 3 years as it was getting built. I know the capacity of that school was built for 720, and we've got 990. That's a fairly significant capacity difference, and obviously not your staff's fault. You couldn't go out and get those capacity numbers. I'm just curious actually as to how those numbers got that far off. But I would say in fairness that there's not as much capacity shown, although in some of these schools there is a good bit of capacity that's around there. And there's at least one other school that I think would have been within a 5-mile radius that wasn't included where there's a lot of capacity. But I'm just trying to even out the data on that, not in any way critique the hard work that was done, and really probably critiquing the information you were given more than anything else, which to the extent that's one of the considerations, it's important that the local districts help and give us the best possible information so we can have accurate capacity percentage numbers to work from.
Response or comment on that?
Just so we did contact our office did contact the LEA to get that information from them, because we knew that would be, we want to make sure the authoritative information was coming from the LEA. And I can find out who we contacted in Guilford County if you'd like.
No, it's all right. I have at least it does, unless it matters to another board. I know the numbers, I think, pretty well, so.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions about Robert J. Brown? Okay, Ms. Kamnitz?
Oh, actually, I forgot that was. So, I did notice, looking at both Revolution and Robert J. Brown, is that in both cases, it appears that they are going into areas with a great deal of capacity in the existing traditional schools. So, you're saying that there's less capacity than there appears, but still quite a bit of capacity.
Yes, but not as much as appears here. I think it's important to be fair in what the factual background is.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Moving away from Robert J. Brown, Achievement Charter Academy in Harnett County. Okay. Doral Academy in Wake County. Wendell Falls Charter Academy in Wake County. North Raleigh Charter Academy in Wake County.
Chair,
Yes, Mr. Buxton?
if I could take this with another one, because similar questions I have, or maybe comments. So, and I'll say to my colleagues here, I looked at these applications and I tried to divide them up, or they divided up into 3 areas for me. 5 of the 12 I thought clearly met the 6 legislative purposes that are laid out in statute for what a charter school is meant to, criteria for approving a charter school. 5. There were another 5 that I could not really substantiate meeting the legislative purposes, but the Charter School Advisory Board gave them a unanimous vote. So none of the operators on the Charter School Advisory Board or anyone had a dissenting vote. Some were absent, but and kind of in respect for process in an advisory board that advises us, I tried to make a unanimous vote mean something. And so I kind of put those 5 aside. That left me with 2. One is North Raleigh Charter and one is Wake Preparatory, that similarly I could not see the connection to the 6 legislative purposes, but also they had dissenting votes. 6-4, I think, was North Raleigh Charter. 7-2 was Wake Preparatory Academy. And I think significantly the dissenting votes were from the existing operators on the Charter School Advisory Board. So people who are running schools and people who are running good schools were the ones that raised concerns and in the end had a dissenting vote, which said something pretty significant to me. So with these two schools, I just am left with a lot of pause about any need they may be addressing, and I couldn't find that. And then concerns from our own Charter School Advisory Board about either their capacity, their focus, their innovation, or their ability to manage the size of the school that they were. So I don't really have any questions on these, frankly. In both of those were important criteria to me, the operators and the split vote, and then also the lack of connection to a legislative purpose. I would be happy if the Charter School Advisory Board or the Office of Charter Schools would help me see that connection, but I just wanted to put those issues into discussion.
Because you've mentioned several other schools within Wake County, I think it's important to mention at the table that for several of the schools that are before us for discussion and perhaps approval tomorrow, several of those in Wake County we have received a copious amount of conversation and communication, both from parents advocating for additional opportunities for choice. And I wanted to specifically mention that we did have communication with leadership with Wake County Public Schools from the superintendent, the board chair, and several of the board members contacted me personally to have a discussion about perhaps the impact of these schools in Wake County. I wanted that to be known at the board level. Many of those conversations were seen by all board members at the board table. Okay, let's see, we talked about Wendell Falls. You lumped that with North Raleigh Charter. And then, questions about CE Academy in Wake County?
I do want to go back to, sorry.
Yes, okay, I'm
If I
sorry.
could just- no, it's okay.
Ms. Kamnitz.
So I share Mr. Buxton's concerns in those regards, and I would like to add to that I believe this was reflected in the CSAB minutes. As far as Wendell Falls and North Raleigh are concerned, those are both Charter USA, I believe.
Yes, ma'am.
So 2 schools in 1 year, I think it gave the CSAB pause, and it also gives me pause. And from what I understand, and I can't even remember where I read this, but Charter USA already has an existing charter school in Wake.
Cardinal Charter, right. And
In Wake?
And it's the Cardinal Charter Board that does run Cardinal Schools that's currently in
And-
Wake County will be the board that will be running these 2 schools also, yes.
Do you recall whether that school has been meeting growth? Because somewhere in my notes, I have a note to myself that they have not been.
Do have that, because I knew I was going to be asked that.
You can,
Cardinal Charter has been a B school since its existence. In 17-18, they did not meet growth, nor did they meet growth in 16-17. They did meet it in 15-16, did not meet it in 14-15, but they have been a B school their entire existence.
do you have handy what their ED numbers are, or percentage?
What their EDS number is? I do not have that. They are outperforming both the county and the state as far as proficiency for students with disabilities. Excuse me, you asked for EDS, I'm sorry. They're at 39.1, the county's at 39.1, and the state's at 43.6.
Yes, Dr.
Just a quick
Oxendine?
question. Okay, talk to me about proficiency. This is a B school, right?
Yes,
Not
ma'am.
meeting growth. Okay, what about proficiency levels? See, I like proficiency. I like growth. I like proficiency.
At grade level proficiency, they were at 73.2%. 17-18, they were at 76.3. In 16-17, they were 77.2.
So they're climbing?
They
inching?
They did not. They actually went down.
Went
As far
down
as
a bit.
college and career readiness, they were at 63.4. In 16-17, they were 67.4. 15-16, they were 69.2.
Compared to the LEA?
The LEA in 17-18, Cardinal was at 73.2. The county is at 65.8. 16-17, they were at 76.3. The county is at 67.2. 15-16, they were 77.2. The county was 67.9.
Thank you.
I think in reading the CSAB, minutes, part of the conversation, reflecting the concerns, was the ability to, and a nod to the enormous responsibility that it is to even open one school per year, and perhaps the concern that, opening two at the same time, might present a challenge, not necessarily the strength of the application of the school or the need for the school, but more, every dot that must be dotted in order to, open two schools at the same time. It's been done before, but that was the nature of the concerns, not on the school's programming or,
And I'm sorry, Ms. White, who expressed those concerns again?
it's in the Charter School
Yeah.
Advisory,
Notes.
board minutes that are posted at the bottom of your. Yes, okay.
And
Further questions?
I have
Yeah,
one-
Ms.
one-
Camden?
One other comment in terms of North Raleigh and Wake Prep. The maps were very helpful, thank you. But what I see in that part of Wake County is pretty, I know it's a high-growth area, but it's also pretty dense in terms of the number of schools. Within a 5-mile radius of North Raleigh, there would be 5 charter schools and 14 traditional schools, and Wake Prep, 5 charter schools and 10 traditional schools. I think I've got those numbers correct. So pretty dense in that part of Wake County already.
We did check with the waiting lists on those charter schools that are in the North Raleigh area. Envision Charter has a waiting list of 956 students. Endeavor has a waiting list of 1,476 students. Franklin Academy, theirs is plus 1,000. And then Roseville Charter is 1,569. So those schools in that area do have pretty large waiting lists also.
So as the area grows, the interest in charter education is growing.
Right, and then there's some data in here too that shows that every year 700 to 1,000 school-age students are moving into that area, if that data is correct.
And they may be coming from charter, they may have charter experiences.
Oh, I'm sorry, it came after CE. I
Yeah,
got
it's-
confused.
yeah, it's
I
okay, I'm just
apologize.
trying to help us to keep, I'm really just trying to help Mr. Machado, not hop from one to the other. Okay, so we've discussed Wendell Falls, North Raleigh Charter, we're on to CE Academy in, Western Wake County. Any questions about CE Wake County, or CE Academy? Okay, that brings us to Wake Prep Academy. Questions about Wake Prep? Yes, sir, Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would again like to echo the sentiments that I think the maps were super helpful because, you know, what I know at this point is Mecklenburg County, right? It's difficult to get oriented, so I appreciate that context. I'm going to zoom right in on EDS because, I mean, y'all know I'm always on guard against anything that exacerbates socioeconomic or racial segregation. What I do appreciate about this application is that, if I'm not mistaken, they have voluntarily opted for a weighted lottery, right, of a percent of
35%.
35%, right. So there's obviously a motivation to make sure that kids who might typically slip through the cracks will be targeted. The concern I have is given, you know, kind of the contextual nature of the area. And in the application, I could be reading it wrong, but I think it's, you know, on page 19, it talks about not targeting specific populations of students. I want to ensure that the kids that are in fact slipping through the cracks are also the ones that populate the school. And so is there a way that we can raise that threshold? Is it arbitrarily set? Frankly, this is something I would like for all the charters, not just this one specifically, so it feels kind of out of sorts to just be calling this one out. But is there a way we can raise that threshold? Because even though it's a valiant effort, 35% is actually, by comparison to traditional publics, a pretty low threshold of poverty.
I think State Board of Ed certainly has the ability to put that stipulation in. I would suggest that, I mean, that is what they're asking, what the percentage that they're targeting. And on a weighted lottery, I think it's really important. Their economic disadvantaged students are going to get extra preference to fill those 35% slots. After those 35% slots have been filled, those same students are going to go into the general population lottery, and so they have even another chance to get in. So there's, we found that in our CSP grant weighted lottery discussions. So there's a chance for these schools to be even higher than their target because they're going to be in the lottery twice.
But it's diminished, right? I mean, after that capacity has been filled, right? Their chances of being placed there is proportionally smaller, correct?
Proportionally, but they would have the same chance as anybody else that goes into the lottery with what we call the general population.
Right.
Great questions.
All right. I think it's something we should consider. I mean, as a discussion, I think it's something we ought to consider going forward in the way that we kind of manage this approval process. Just holding that up as a priority.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback on Mr. Ford's comments and address them in a way as well. A couple years ago, my office put together a study. We did kind of a steering committee. First, we did some outreach as to why some of our minority populations in general were not choosing charter schools. At a state level, as a whole, charter schools are as diverse as traditional public schools on a whole. But we also realized there were some gaps in there. Hispanic gap was even larger than the African-American gap. And so we started asking questions in the steering committee. And what we found with a very broad Hispanic steering committee was that people didn't know about charter schools. They didn't know they existed. They didn't know what they were. They didn't know what a charter school even meant. In that case specifically, there was a language barrier there that charter didn't translate language-wise. And so we actually brought some recommendations to this board a couple years ago about how to do that, about putting together a PR and marketing campaign and doing outreach into our minority communities or underserved communities so that we could at least get the message out and see what kind of impact that had. There are other states that do this, and they've been quite successful at it. This board chose not to do anything with that, but I think we should. I think that that's one of those things that we should do. I mean, we should make sure that everybody's kind of on an equal playing field as to hearing what opportunities for education are out there across the board. Those recommendations are still out there. We could bring them back and we could address them, but I think at the basic level, if we're just not going to tell people about what opportunities they have, then it's kind of hard to even have these discussions, right, as to why, asking questions why.
I think that'd be a great idea, and if those are still available, if somebody could hunt those down for us.
We'll bring them back. We'll bring them back to you.
I've only been here for half a year, but you're right. I mean, for black students, they're about proportionally represented, right? Same right. For Hispanic students, Latinx students, they're woefully underrepresented. Can you recall offhand why the white students were kind of over-selecting charters?
Well, we didn't really focus on that. We focused on why the minority students weren't selecting. I mean, that was kind of the focus of the steering committee. So we can bring all that back to you, and you can
appreciate that.
Look through all that material.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
And Lieutenant Governor, our office took a lot of those recommendations, and we've shared them with our charter schools, and I think you're seeing much more of our charter schools having their newsletters in Spanish, their applications in Spanish, right. That sort of thing. So we've taken a lot of
I wasn't even aware of that, but thank you, Mr. Machado.
Ms. Kamnitz, then Mr. Buxton, then Dr. Oxendine.
Just to pick up on what Lieutenant Governor just said, the weighted lottery is only as good as the number of people you've got in the applicant pool.
That's right.
Because 35% can mean nothing if you don't have enough people applying for the lottery in the first place. So I think that that's critical if we're really going to concentrate on this, that we find ways to do that, get that marketing done, and get the word out to all the populations that we need to reach.
And I think you'll see in the CSP grant application that they are asking for the marketing plan. You asked Mr. Whalen what was the marketing plan, so you are seeing that. CSAP certainly asks those same questions when schools say they want a certain percentage of EDS, so that's good points.
Mr. Buxton.
Just a couple more WAKE prep pieces, and I thank Mr. Ford and Lieutenant Governor for bringing up the issue of the 35%. I think they clearly, and that board is clearly committed to this school and their effort, and I think very intentional. I think the 35% was a reflection of that. And also, I believe they have taken their first year number from 1,600 to 900, which I still think is a huge amount for a first year in a charter school. But I think it's a reflection of their need. I don't know if any of you have had the great pleasure of serving on the planning commission in any of your cities, but I did that for about 4 years and did a lot of zonings and rezonings. And you would sometimes get developers who would come to you and realize they might be on the wrong side of a vote and would start throwing out any compromise they could. And pretty soon their development really didn't look much like what they had planned. I feel a little bit like this with this application in this sense. As I went back to the budget and the expenditures and the instructional plan, it no longer matched up to me with the population, the school size, what they were looking to accomplish. And I felt like if a school that has decided it wants to shift gears a little bit and look differently at its school population, one, in Wake County would probably look at their location and think about that. And second, they would look at their instructional plan. 4 EC teachers for 900 to 1,600 students was concerning to me. Some of you know I serve on the board of a charter in Wake County, so these operational issues are important. The marketing plan and other instructional ELL investments, I just didn't see the school that was in the application now matching up with the new conditions that they were suggesting. So if that is what I take them at their word for what they want to get done. I'd kind of want them to take another cut, like that developer at the planning committee. I'd kind of like them to take another look at how they're going to accomplish the kind of school they're now bringing to us, which feels a little different.
Mr. Buxton, that's a great recognition on your part. The information that the board received from the school suggesting that it might make some adjustments to its original plan would actually be material changes to the charter application. And so, Mr. Machado, can you explain to the board the best process for handling those suggested changes at this stage of the game?
With the changes that Wake Prep has proposed, I think it would be appropriate to send it back to Charter School Advisory Board, which is meeting Monday, for them to look at this, a second lens on it, to see if what they're proposing, number one, is doable, does match their budget, is there any changes, and let them make another recommendation with the changes that they're suggesting, and then bring it back to the State Board. State Board certainly has the ability to approve it with these stipulations, but I think that CSAB certainly needs to be consulted in that decision, in my opinion.
Board members' thoughts on that? What we'd like to do is perhaps have it go back, this particular recommendation, have the application amended to include these items that have been sent to us after CSAB made its initial recommendation, and then have CSAB discuss that at their Monday meeting.
Okay. With the understanding that State Board of Ed would be comfortable voting on this application at their next meeting?
Yes, and I would even say that in the event that the board had happened to have a called meeting in between June and July, that we could put this item on the agenda so that this school, if approved, would have the same opportunity for a full planning year that's been afforded to the others that'll be approved during tomorrow's agenda. And then the last school on for our discussion today is Alamance Community School. Questions, colleagues? Terrific. Before we close this discussion, I do need to make it known to board members that Office of Charter Schools and the board did receive a petition from a group of constituents in Wake County, and I do have that petition with me at my desk that I will share at a later time. Any other comments, questions from board members today about any of the 12 schools that are being recommended for approval? Hearing none, Mr. Chair, that concludes our committee discussion today. Thank you so much, board members, for participating.
Thank you, Ms. White. We'll now move. Ms. White.
Excuse me. Mr. Buxton has reminded me that we do have a consent item that
Yes,
I
you do.
need to, thank you, Mr. Buxton. Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools has a restart application that that we heard last month, and it is on the consent agenda tomorrow. I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, I call on you for our Strategic Planning Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm James E. Ford, the Chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, alongside my Vice Chair, Jill Kamitz. Delighted to be able to be before you all today as we're winding down, hopefully, our strategic planning process. We're delighted to have in our midst some guests. Board members, you may recall, as we talked in past times, we've entertained the idea of how a strategic plan with equity and whole child at the center would look. What would be the mechanisms for enacting that, both at the state level and how those would look at local education agencies. We had the opportunity to look over Maryland's approach from a state level and see what some of the key levers they were able to pull in their state level plans. And now we're going to be treated to have Wake County's very own Office of Equity Affairs to be able to present to us and to let us know what equity might look like at the LEA level. So I will turn it over to Dr. Rodney Trice from Wake County Office of Equity Affairs. Dr. Trice?
Good. Thank you all. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you today. There's a participant packet that's being passed out, and we'll refer to that throughout our presentation today. But today we have really two aims, as you can see on the screen, to provide the board with an overview of the Office of Equity Affairs, but also to give you a high-level overview of some of the fundamental work that is unfolding in the office, talking about more specific actions that we're taking as a district. So we're going to couch our conversation in three different buckets this morning. The formation of the Office of Equity Affairs. We're going to talk about the structure and function of the office and a bit about the future direction of our office. So we're not going to be able to get into all the specifics or provide you with an exhaustive list of tasks that we complete. You are also not on the ground in Wake County to observe the work. So the packet that we're passing around just provides a bit more context. We're not going to read through it, but at your leisure, you can look through it and just get a bit more context for what our conversation will be today. So let's talk a bit about the formation of the Office of Equity Affairs. So when I think about the creation of the office, the reasons are grounded in many different ways. Two that really stand out to me are a community push for a stronger partnership with the school system in addressing long-standing opportunity gaps that we've been dealing with in the district. That's one primary reason for the formation of the office. The second is, I think board leadership as well as administration leadership saw the need for a strategic focus in terms of dealing with some of our most pressing equity challenges as a district. And to that end, the board established in July of 2013 the Office of Equity Affairs. I was hired a year later to provide leadership in that office, but it wasn't until February of 2015 that the office really came to life. Between July of 2014 and February of 2015, I spoke to literally hundreds of people in Wake County to get a sense of what they would want to see and experience from the Office of Equity Affairs. And at that retreat is where we rolled out two things that are very important to our work that I think it's important that this board also hears. The first is our why, our purpose and mission as a department. So our purpose is really to ensure equal and equitable opportunity is a priority at all levels of our organization, and all of our stakeholders can take advantage of the benefits that we have to offer in Wake County. And we really do think and believe that we have world-class benefits to offer. Our mission is to influence policy practices and beliefs to secure a transformative learning experience for at-promise students and families, those who are traditionally and historically most disconnected from a positive schooling experience. So when we wake up every day, those in my office and our colleagues across the district, this is where our energy lies. We want greater populations of our stakeholders to experience the benefits of our district. So our why is very important to us. The second thing we shared was the scope of our work. So at a very high level, how do we perform? What do we do? And you can see 3 buckets that really highlight our work. So the first being community partnerships. We have really strong connections with our community through a number of different programs, an example of which is our family academies that we offer. We offer over 300 family academies, partnering with parents from everything from how to create resumes to literacy strategies with their children. So over 300 family academies we offer in a year. We've impacted over 4,000 families this year. And that's just an example of the community partnerships we've established. We also have what's called a community equity leadership team. It's made up or comprised of community leaders who are most concerned about equity, and they serve as an advisory board to my office, but also senior leadership in the district. So the other 2 buckets are focused on equity coaching. So we have equity coaching at the school level and also the central service level. Equity coaching at the school level, an example of that is working with middle schools and elementary schools to lower suspensions in our schools. We have a number of meetings and professional learnings that we partner with our principals on to lower exclusionary practices that are reflected in our numbers, and just being there on the ground with them, partnering with them with those equity challenges is really beneficial, as opposed to just saying you need to stop, you need to lower the number of suspensions. We're actually working with principals on problem solving those most pressing equity challenges. At the central service level, an example of equity coaching is partnerships we've created with other departments, particularly our academics department, to ensure that the curriculum that we have is culturally responsive. The materials that we have are rigorous and provide a high level learning experience for our students. So partnerships and equity coaching is kind of where we get our bread and butter. We like to think of ourselves as a coaching office. We're there on the ground with school leaders and district leaders, helping them solve the most pressing equity challenges that we face as a district. The other thing that's vitally important with a district with over 180 schools, how do we provide our service to schools in the central service? We organize our work at 3 different levels. Level 1, we provide resources and materials that impact all schools and departments within our district. Those things can range from PD modules, books, articles, activities that principals can do with staff around professional development, a policy that we'll have that'll be rolling out soon. So all of these materials and resources that are available to all schools are primarily housed on our website, and they're accessible to our stakeholders through our website. The other 2 levels are grounded in equity coaching. So you see level 2 and level 3. Level 2 is equity coaching by request. So it's not uncommon for our office to receive calls from schools to say our 3rd grade PLC is struggling with a group of students who've been bussed in from another part of the county, not a part of the immediate community. Can you come and help us observe the students in the classrooms, how they're experiencing school, and offer recommendations? So we deploy our team to go out to schools and help, again, problem solving. So this equity coaching refers back to the previous slide that I spoke. The level 3 coaching is provided to all schools and departments as assigned. And so our office also may be contacted by our superintendent, area superintendents who observe issues in schools, and we're directed to go into those schools and provide service. You may be aware, for instance, of some of the social media incidents that we've had as a district around race that disrupts our school community. Sometimes our team is responsible and directed to go in and help school communities, including parents, teachers, students, manage the disruptive nature of that. That's an example that I think folks can really grab onto. So those are the three areas that we felt were important to establish before we actually kind of facilitated the work of our office. We're going to switch gears a bit and talk about our structure and function and some of the philosophical underpinnings of our department. The first of which is our equity leadership framework. So you see on the screen there, we have 5 domains that we believe all educators in our district should be knowledgeable about, right? If they want to be highly effective leaders for our students, for a diverse student population. And under each of those domains, there are a number of essential learnings that I won't go through, but if you look in the packet that we passed out, you'll see those essential learnings kind of listed there. And I have to say that those essential learnings are ever expanding, but they inform the type of professional development that we provide our teachers, that we work with our students on, and even our community partners. We do have a departmental philosophy when it comes to our equity work. We lean on an adaptive leadership approach, meaning we are not interested in dead statistics only. We use statistics and trends to provide new learning around those statistics and trends. So it's not enough for us just to disaggregate data and hand it out. Our work is about looking at the data and asking ourselves, so what do we do about it, right? And so we provide new learning around statistics. That new learning has to be in service to changing mindsets and attitudes toward our challenges. And also, it informs our work in terms of partnering with those who are closest to the challenge. If we are looking at student groups that aren't performing and we're designing solutions for those student groups, we can't design solutions without actually engaging those student groups or those family groups. So we are intentional about the partnerships we establish to perform our work in the Office of Equity Affairs. This is all in service to being responsive to our community, right, and to our needs as a community. So when I think about how we need to be responsive and what that means and how we operationalize our work, we lean on our cultural responsiveness framework. As you can see on the screen, this is our district's cultural responsiveness framework, and it's a 3-legged framework, grounded in academic achievement. And we're not talking about the technical aspects of academic achievement, but how do we create conditions that promote high levels of achievement? How do you raise rigor? How do you raise relationships that nurture high academic achievement? So much of our professional development is in that space. The second leg focuses on allowing students and families to develop and maintain their cultural integrity. We believe strongly that students and families shouldn't have to leave a part of themselves at the schoolhouse door just to be successful in our schools. We want to use culture as a springboard to higher levels of achievement. So we do a lot of professional development that uses culture and the cultural assets that students and families have to promote high levels of academic achievement through such strategies as culture responsive instructional strategies, providing culture responsive curricula, that type of thing. The last leg, critical consciousness, is a fancy term for student and family voice, right? So as an organization, we can't be afraid of the critical nature that may come from our students and families. We have to use the criticism, their consciousness, to improve what we do as an organization. And so we believe that that's an essential part of getting better. Those who are experiencing our school system, the ways that they're experiencing our school system are very important to us and very important to how we can get better at serving the needs of our students and families. So we can't be responsive if we don't, we can't be responsive if we're not doing all 3 of the the legs that you see there. So this is an action-oriented framework. And you can see around the framework, there's this action-oriented mindset that we want all of our educators to have. We want them to be able to see inequities wherever they are, and that's just not through data, but also talking to our students and families, looking into classrooms. What do you see? What do you observe? They need to understand inequities, not from their perspective, but from the perspective of those who are experiencing our system. And then we need to interrupt inequities wherever they are through partnering with our stakeholders. So we love to say in our district, when we're focused on this work, see, understand, interrupt. That's what we do. That's what we want to do every day, and be action-oriented in that space. So, you know, we tried to kind of gel our work into a statement, and this is, I think, one that really resonated with our team. What our aim is really to transform culture so that equity work is not a set-aside, but it's a routine and natural part of our conversation and our practice, right? It's not a Equity Tuesday thing or an Equity PD. No, it's professional development for our teachers and our students and our parents in an effort to secure that transformative experience for our students and families. I want to very quickly introduce my team. So I can't talk about the structure and function of our office without also allowing some of my team members to just share for a minute or two about what it is they do in the Office of Equity Affairs. As you can see on the screen, this is how our office is organized. This is how our work unfolds. So when the rubber hits the ground, when we get up in the morning and we're out in schools or we're in the community and you want to know what it is we're doing, these are the buckets that really describe what that is. So I'm going to ask Dr. Maria Rosa Rangel to get up and just speak very briefly about family academies and family engagement.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to share what I do as the Director of Family and Community Engagement for Wake County Public Schools. My job is to support schools with strategies that are effective and equitable as they plan how they're going to reach their families. And sometimes that means that we have to be intentional and go into the communities and reach out these families and work very closely with the community, because really it takes a village. In this case, it takes a community to really raise a family. So that's part of my job. I also oversee the family academies, and we provide free parent workshops, and we have different topics, and we do them in every school. They invite us to go and do those, as well as community sites. And this year we have done over 388 family academies. We have reached over 4,820 parents, and so that's also great. And we offer workshops in different languages. Wake County is very diverse. We have over 223 different languages. So we provide them according to the demographics of the schools and community in those targeted languages, including English as well. I also oversee the World Culture Series, where I partner with different universities to bring professors so that they could talk about different countries that reflects the demographics of our students and provide faculty and staff with the knowledge so that they could better serve our students and families. I also support the Office of Equity Affairs with any initiative that requires for us to work as a team to provide PD, professional development, to faculty and staff. And of course, I also do family and community engagement, staff development to educate schools. I have to better utilize the dual capacity framework. And again, to be able to use that equity lens as we provide services to our families and understand the demographics of the schools. Thank you.
So if you ever have the opportunity to visit one of our Family Academy sessions, it's just amazing to kind of see how hungry parents are to support the school system in being able to kind of push their children to higher levels of achievement. I'm going to ask Lauren Mascareñas to come up next, who's going to talk about coaching and leadership that we have in the office.
Thank you all for having me today. As Rodney said, my name is Lauren Mascareñas. I'm Director for Coaching and Leadership in Wake County. What this means is that my focus is on how do we build capacity for equity work within Wake County. I am responsible for principals, assistant principals, but all district level leaders, which ends up being about 750 people. I don't spend time with all of them, but I am available for coaching conversations with them. And a lot of times I like to think of myself as kind of a fire starter. People say, can you come out and talk about what this might look like at my school or in my department or at my site? And we kind of talk through all the different ways that this could look in different lens, because our district is so large and demographically diverse as well as geographically diverse. Equity is going to look very different in different parts of our district than it will in other places. So that's a big part of my job, is spending time with leaders. It may also be a coach or a teacher or someone at a site that wants to start the work, and they're the equity leader that I work with. I have also spent a great deal of time, as Dr. Trice mentioned, we have done some work on reducing suspensions. So I've worked with the elementary cohort of principals to talk about how do we reduce exclusionary practices, and not necessarily with the lens of lowering suspensions, but how do we keep kids in class more, and really giving them a lot of our time and energy and professional development at those sites so that we can reduce the disproportionality we were seeing in their suspension rates. Thank you.
700 leaders, that's a lot of leaders. So we also have a focus on student engagement, and I'm going to invite Teresa Bunner up to speak briefly about that.
Good morning, everyone. I brought notes because once I start talking about students, sometimes I can't stop. So I'm going to stay on topic this morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to you. I guess if we talk about me being the director of student engagement, that means I have 160,000 constituents that I am responsible for in Wake County. And when I do go out to schools and introduce myself to students, I do tell them that I consider them to be my bosses, and that they are to contact me, and believe me, they take me up on it. I've had a number of conversations. Our kids, our young people are amazing, and I would just encourage you, as you all sit here with some of the problems you want to solve, I'm going to tell you the people with the best answers are those 18 and under sitting in those school buildings. When we do student engagement work in Wake County schools, our goal is to deepen our understanding so that student engagement is not something that we add to our work, but that it is how we engage our students to actually drive the work that we do. We need to see our students not as recipients, but as the key stakeholders and partners in their education with us. Often we approach this work as what we do to or for students, and we invite folks to consider, how do we center the practices and selves of our students, their families, and their communities, and draw on those cultural assets and strengths that Dr. Trice talked about. Our students and families do not come to us as blank slates, and so how do we take what they bring to us and build that foundationally and take their learning from there? But we also in our office recognize the importance of creating spaces for students, and because we are such a large district, the opportunity to connect our students from all different areas of the school district is important. So just in the last year, we have continued our Helping Hands mentoring program, which serves young men in our school district. As a kind of culmination of that year, we held a Young Men's Summit where we had over 300 young men and their families come, get to go through workshops, a resource fair of community resources. We sponsored our very first Young Women's Summit this year. Meredith College was kind enough to host us. We had over 250 young women participate, and we are looking to double that number next year. And we have, starting next week, our third annual Summer Writing Institute, which seeks to create space for historically underrepresented students for 3 weeks to be mentored by local and nationally known writers, performers, and artists. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
So we believe in order to close opportunity gaps that many districts experience, you have to leverage the power of students to do that. And so Teresa, the work that she does can't go unnoticed. So I am going to turn it over to Christina Spears, who's going to talk briefly about teacher support and what we do in Wake County to work with our most prized possessions.
Thank you, Dr. Trice. Good afternoon, board. Thanks for having us this afternoon. My role in the office, I play two roles. Technically, I'm special assistant / coordinating teacher. So I tell folks that I wear two hats. My first hat is an important hat. I do a lot of logistics and strategic planning with Dr. Trice to make sure our team is all on the same page to serve those 160,000 students, 18,000 faculty and staff, to make sure all of our planning, the professional learning, the workshops, all of the things that we are offering are cohesive as a team and are meeting the needs of our school district. And as coordinating teacher, I support educators all across our district. So I think of my type of supports in two buckets. The first is supporting the grassroots work that kind of just pops up at our school sites or with individual teachers. So for example, for 2 years now, a group of teachers has been screening a film called Teach Us All and hosting chats after that, just an informal, voluntary way for teachers and educators across our district to have a shared learning experience and then reflect on that experience. This year, a similar group of educators planned our first annual Ed Camp Equity, which is an unconference where the sessions are decided that morning. So my role was just to support those teachers in planning that, getting the word out across the district, and showing that we as an office support the grassroots work of our educators across the district. We've also done things like Twitter chats. If there's something cool on TV that we want to watch as a team, we'll say engage with us on Twitter as a way to talk about this, or join us for the Hate U Give or the Best of Enemies at the movies, and we'll go out and have a chat and chew. And then I've offered direct support to teachers. So if I get a request from a teacher who says, I want to rewrite my essential questions to be more culturally responsive, or I want to take a critical look at my materials and curriculum and think differently about how I can share this information with my students, I go in and have coaching conversations with those individual teachers and PLTs to kind of put their equity lens on. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. So it's really good to kind of problem solve and coach educators through those things. Thank you all.
Pam Gales is going to spend just a few minutes talking about our Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Program, which is a little different side of the house, but still important to equity work.
I guess it's afternoon now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to speak here today. The purpose of our Minority and Business program is to promote equity, inclusion, and fairness of all minority and women-owned businesses. One of the main things that I do in my program, I have a core of services that I do provide in the program every day to our minority and women businesses. I am there for marketing. For marketing, I increase the internal and external customer service and knowledge of minority and women businesses to let them know how our program is run, and through that I have trade shows, I have website things on the website, and I do community events. I also do outreach. That's one of my second core services. And I attend a lot of pre-bid meetings. I share information about projects that are coming up, things that are going to be relevant for these minority and women businesses to have an opportunity to do business with Wake County Public Schools. My third area is technical assistance. This one is tough because this is a one-on-one. I provide one-on-one assistance to minority and women-owned businesses to let them know what we're offering and the type of opportunities they may have. And I get requests all the time to have these one-on-one meetings, so it does become very difficult when you're, one person. Then there's utilization. We want to make sure we're utilizing our minority and women businesses in the best way possible throughout Wake County Public Schools. And I give them opportunity to participate in our pre-bid meetings, our outreaches. I invite them to other opportunities with other organizations. And then I have compliance. Compliance is very important because we have a lot of projects that we do. And in those projects, for construction, on the construction side, it's required by state statute that we make sure that we have this participation, right? So the compliance piece is the portion where the contractors have to report to me what they're doing on the problem and who they're paying on our projects using our funds, because of course we have that $1 billion bond that we're spending this money to build these schools. And once the compliance piece is done, I also monitor after the compliance piece to the audit all the way through the whole process. So I make sure that those opportunities were given to those minority and women businesses on our projects. So on a few of our projects, I just want to share with you that we are overall for the last 2-3 years, we've maintained on the construction side over 25%. We're currently doing an assessment of my program to expand my role into the procurement process because we need to do better in goods and services. There are a lot of opportunities in goods and services that we're looking to make sure that we capture that possibility to have some more inclusion and participation in those contracts. So as long as we're providing equitable opportunity throughout the school system in all our contracting, that's what the program is all about. And I've been in place like 4.5 years now, so I've got the program to a level where we are being more inclusive, but we need to do better. Thank you.
So you see with the last bucket, my team left me with the boring stuff, the state and federal compliance around equity. So, I mean, I'm sure you all know about Title IX and Title VI. I won't bore you with that. But so that's the area that I handle along with my team. But as I said, this is where the rubber meets the road. When we get up every day in the morning to serve our community, this is where our service lands. Just a quick note about our future direction. We are looking to expand our mentoring programs in our district. When you look at the national data sets around mentoring and what that does for the outcomes of students, I mean, it just blows my mind every time I see it in terms of improving student achievement outcomes. We're going head in full force into expanding our mentoring programs in our office, but also increasing enrichment experiences for underrepresented at-promise students. The second bucket there, you see cross-departmental collaboration. With the expansion of our team last year, we're looking to have our work, equity work, become more systemic. And that just basically means teaching teachers where they are, working with principals where they already work, and making sure that all of our schools, all of our departments has access to us. And so you can kind of see with that second bullet, that means setting departmental equity goals that then we can collapse into a district equity plan, so to speak. The last area, capacity building, is really about succession planning in our district. If I'm not here, if our team's not here, as leadership changes, does the district stay committed to serving those students and families who've been traditionally, historically marginalized in our communities? And so we're designing a number of different programs that onboard principals, onboard teachers, and others to some of the work that you see outlined in the packet that we handed out. And then because we're a new staff, we have a lot to do in terms of making sure that we stay on the cutting edge. So we have a commitment to professional development and ongoing learning in our office to sustain the work. We'll be happy to answer any questions if there are any, but that concludes an overview of the Office of Equity Affairs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trice and the rest of the team. Board members, before we open it up for questions, I would like to say, one, Dr. Trice, I don't think that your area is boring at all. In terms of state and federal compliance, as we endeavor as a state board to sort of cast a vision for closing opportunity gaps for all of our students, particularly our marginalized student populations, I think it's important to frame our questions and our insights around this notion of how does what we're putting together as a strategic plan, how does that translate to the districts? So whatever we're putting on paper, whatever we're sort of envisioning as our ideas for how to make this a truly equitable system, what might districts do? And of course we know, and I consider us fortunate to have Wake County, who's really doing, you should know, some premier work in terms of not just the state, but also the region and nationally, to be able to have a leader as well as a department. But what might this look like for districts that aren't demographically the same as Wake County? I'm thinking those that are suburban or those that are perhaps rural. And so as we address those questions, just continue to keep that frame in mind. And so at this point in time, I guess I'll open it up. Any questions from my colleagues? Mr. Duncan?
Does Wake County have a current disparity study that from which, for example, your MWBE work, you key off of what's there?
No, we don't have a current disparity study.
When was the last one done, if you know?
I'm not sure.
Wake County Public Schools has never done a disparity study, but we do use the state goals of 10%. The hub office and the NCDOT are currently going through a disparity study, and I do work closely with both of those teams. I'm currently, going to meetings with the consultant that's on board now. I'm also the president of the North Carolina MWBA Coordinators Network, so they're pulling me in on those type of conversations for their disparity study. And once those disparity studies are done, we'll be able to piggyback off of those. But we have talked about having our own disparity study, so we just have not got to that point yet.
Will the disparity studies you referred to be statewide?
Yes, they are statewide.
Will you be able to break down the data by county, because it's going to be different county by county?
I'm not that in those meetings of how it's going to be broken down, but I know the goals will affect the whole state of North Carolina for both transportation on the NCDOT side and on the DOA side.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very insightful and informative. I have a couple of questions. Number one is I know that within Wake County, there is an Indian education project. It's I think the title now is Title VI. It changes every so often. But with reauthorization by Congress, the title changes. So I think it's 6. Have you reached out, do you work with that community and that project and when I say community, they're dispersed, the students are dispersed across the school system, but are you familiar with that initiative? It's been in place, I would say, 20 years.
Yes, we're very familiar with the initiative through our family academies. We've partnered with them. I know that members of our department attend their annual meetings every year, but there's always more work to be done. In fact, when we look at our strategic planning that we're doing internally, that's one of the topics that's right at the top of our agenda, is how to build stronger connections with
the Indian Education Project.
Yes.
Gwen Locklear is the director.
Yes.
Then my other question, you talked about working with principals and teachers to reduce the suspension rates in schools. I appreciate that tremendously, and I do know that over time we can look at data and see a disproportionate numbers in terms of certain populations of kids who are suspended either in school or out of school. But how do you work with schools to help them understand that effective discipline isn't being compromised?
So
Effective school-wide discipline.
Yeah.
Classroom management isn't being compromised.
So to your point, so when we go in and work with our principals around discipline, you very quickly realize that the discipline disparity that you see is just a symptom of something else that's not happening right or correctly in the school. And so we're not just talking about discipline data, but we're talking about effective teaching strategies in classrooms that prevent students from getting bored, acting out, and escalating. And so depending on what the school sees as their most pressing equity challenge is kind of where we work. Discipline might be the avenue through which we connect with some of our schools, but the work we do is never really specifically around discipline. It's a part of it, classroom management skills, that's certainly a part of our discussions. De-escalation skills is a part of our discussion, but we're also talking about creating engaging and equitable classroom environments that build community so that discipline does not become an issue. So that's kind of where we are. When Lauren talked about the focus is not on reducing suspensions, but strategies that keep kids in classrooms and engaged in classrooms, that's where the bulk of our work happens.
Thank you.
And so I also want to add, we can even see that in some of the teacher working condition surveys in schools where we're coaching. So you don't see a dip in teachers saying, you know, they aren't being supported discipline-wise. The data either stays the same in terms of teacher satisfaction or goes up around the idea of working with students. And I think that's attributable to not just, you know, telling principals stop suspending students, but partnering with them in terms of, you know, how do we create environments where children can thrive. That's kind of our focus.
Mr. Buxton?
Thank you. I only get a week and a half to express my pride as an Enloe parent. The last of my 3 kids is graduating on the 14th. I did one comment and one question, if you would. The comment is that since Principal Chavis, who I think has taken this matter as seriously as any principal I know, put the equity team in at Enloe High School, the difference in student engagement, student culture has been palpable. And I think we've seen real benefits across Enloe from that effort. And the equity team, I would say, is kind of leading that charge, and the students themselves. And so for, I believe it was Miss Bronner, she's absolutely right. And some of the changes we've seen come to Enloe because of the voice of that team. I just want to recognize that and appreciate your support of Enloe. The question is, we're about to go into a strategic plan conversation, and I just wonder if there are any data that you look at the district level that kind of tells you whether you are finding success in your work that you would either raise up or recommend to us that we ought to be thinking about from an equity standpoint.
Right. So, so there is special data that we look at, but it's the same data that if I were from the academics department, I would be, you know, saying, yeah, this is the data we need to look at. So student achievement is at the core of our business. We want, if the work we're doing does not result in higher levels of achievement, then we're not doing something right, particularly for at-promise students. Students have been traditionally, historically marginalized. So outcome data around who has access to gifted education services, suspension and expulsions. We spend a lot of time surveying teachers and students. So we have student survey questions that are specifically grounded with an equity focus, as well as teacher survey data around culture and around the type of professional development they experience. And that's important. If you look at much of the research, particularly from John Hattie, and it talks about strategies that increase student achievement, teacher efficacy is right there at the top. Do they believe that they've been equipped to teach students at a high level? And teachers can only believe that if you've actually provided the service. So our questions to teachers are around John Hattie's work around teacher efficacy with respect to equity work. And so if we can see upticks in that work, and we can also align or that sentiment, and we can also draw dots to increase student achievement, decreases in exclusionary practices, we feel that we can sleep very well at night in pushing this work. And so over the 5 years, we've been able to draw those lines. So we do feel happy in that we're going in the right direction.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Trice, I just commend you and the Wake County school system for taking this on. I think this is likely the most important work we could do in North Carolina to our long-term success of our students. What suggestions would you have for us in considering how to take what you're doing or something else all across our state?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mr. Ford knows, I think, so I am a part of a collaborative of district equity officers. We meet informally. It's not an association or anything like that. But we meet frequently, and we're of different sizes, different geographical locations. And we're just sharing best strategies. And having worked at department before, I know that a state level office can't be as granular as we can be as a school district. But what you do have the capacity to do at the state level is to convene leaders and convene folks who are interested in more equitable outcomes. sharing of ideas and best practices. You can archive best practices that have proven effectiveness, speaking of INLO, across the district. There might be a school in eastern North Carolina that could very well do the INLO 5 that Mr. Buxton is talking about. There's nothing special about it because it's in Wake County, but it's about who has the information. So in our little cohort, and we meet just about monthly, that's what we do, and we've been able to, draw on the expertise of Mr. Ford. We're just sharing what works, what doesn't work. How do we serve our communities? What's the latest strategies and latest research on reducing disparities in the range of areas? So when I think about the strategic plan, and we've read the strategic plan, we're excited about the strategic plan. I think being able to serve as a leader to convene ideas around this work is going to be important. That's one area that I would recommend. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Makes great sense. Thank you.
Board members, if there are no more questions, I'm sorry, I apologize. Go ahead, Freeburg.
So, for districts that don't have an Office of Equity Affairs, what are some of the opportunities? I'm looking at the Equity Leadership Supports programs. What are some of the programs that people who are interested from a district level of other districts to get involved, to learn more about what we can do in our own individual districts that don't have these offices? Are there symposiums or something that Wake offers, and even opportunities for educators who are interested in this initiative that don't necessarily have those opportunities at a specific district level?
Sure. So we host a lot of different districts that visit Wake County. It's a regular part of what we do. We don't, hide our resources. We share our resources freely. But we also lean heavily on our RESAs to share. So if you can imagine our RESAs as a broad demographic, geographical structure that allows school districts who may be much smaller than Wake to lean on the expertise we have just because of the resources we have. We've invited educators from other districts to actually attend our workshops and would be open to that. As Mr. Davis suggested, this work is some of the most important work, and it can only be collaborative. If you go back to my departmental philosophy around adaptive leadership, new learning around our most pressing equity challenges, I mean, that's real. We can't lean on old ideas and that haven't proven to be effective. And so if we have a program that's been effective, we are open to sharing that. And I would have to say that there are other districts that have equity offices that I meet with on an ongoing basis. And there's a lot of good information being shared there. I was in Chapel Hill, Carborough before coming to Wake. We didn't have an official office. And you'll find that in many districts. There's not an official Office of Equity Affairs. You have people wearing multiple hats. That's just the nature of being an educator. But we would be glad to incorporate them into our small cohort if they're interested in pushing their district toward more equitable outcomes. So yeah, reach out to me, and I'm sure Mr. Ford, he knows all about our group, and we'd be happy to bring them on.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, if it's all right with you, I recognize we're slightly behind schedule, and so I'd like to modify the agenda, and could we table our strategic plan updates to perhaps tomorrow and just have a conversation then? Or if it's all the same to you, and if you don't mind me standing between lunch, we can continue to go through those very briefly, so I guess I'll leave it in your hands.
I think we've got time to go through the strategic plan now.
All right, with that.
I'd like to connect this conversation with what we just had.
I always want to respect people and their hunger, so thank you.
Equitable.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Want to thank Dr. Trice and his team for a wonderful presentation this morning. I think many of his words echo true as you will see from the feedback that we received from the strategic plan, I think that we are on the right path. We have some work to do when it comes to solidifying the metrics that are within the plan. And with clarifying some of our statements, we have to be very clear and intentional about what we put out there when we truly get this strategic plan in its final form. So my main purpose before you today, to be brief, is to review our timeline, where we are, review the feedback that we've received, outline any next steps, and to take any questions from members today. So if you remember, at your planning and work session, we presented this timeline about what we were going to be doing over this last month. We are currently in the phase where we have collected all feedback. We were supposed to close feedback on May 31st. However, I extended that to June 3rd, just because we had a weekend. It was out there to give people an opportunity to respond and provide feedback, because ultimately I think feedback from those closest to this day to day, that will help inform and truly make this strategic plan one of the strongest ones that we've had for some time. So over the next month, we're going to spend time refining the strategic plan with the strategic plan committee members, going through the feedback that we received and making tweaks that are appropriate. So if we look at our timeline, we are now on June 5th and 6th, where I'm going to highlight today at a very high level the feedback that we received from the field. You had your update today from the Wake County Public Schools Office of Equity Affairs. Next week, we will meet as a strategic planning committee and slice and dice this a variety of ways. On June 26th, we'll send that out to the committee members for a final review. And on June 30th, we want to have a final version of a plan that you can approve at your July 11th meeting. So currently what we're doing, we're looking at the written feedback and analyzing that. I've had the opportunity to present to a variety of shareholder groups. I presented to the GTAC. I had the opportunity to be invited to NCDPS, presented to EPFP. We've sent it out. Allison and I have sent this plan out over Twitter. We've sent it out to a variety of just listservs that we knew that people would engage in this process. We've sent this out through the superintendent's newsletter, in the legislative newsletter, so it has reached a variety of people. So just remember, we settled on 3 goals. I think we have to do the work of truly being clear about what we mean by each of these goals. Remember, our guiding principles are equity and whole child, and much to the points that were made today, this is some of the most important work that we will do. So remember, we sent out the survey. It's been live for some time. We had upwards of 261 responses. Those responses range from students to the State Board of Education members. When we put the strategic plan brochure out there for feedback, I was pleasantly surprised to have parents reaching out to me personally to encourage me to add a parent component to ensure that they were represented here. And of course, our legislative intern, Mr. Greer-Webb, called me out and said that I didn't have a student option included, which I quickly added to this component. So we made that adjustment. I think what is also important here is that all of the educational districts are represented in some way or form as a response to the strategic plan. And I thought that was significant, because for some time it was, we only had the representation of North Central for the longest time, and then everyone started responding. So even though we may not have a lot of responses from at least all 8 are represented. And when it comes to each of the goals, we asked a very broad question about if the goal should be a priority for the State Board of Education. You can see for goal 1, overwhelmingly, we had upwards of 60+% saying that this should be a priority for the state board. I haven't had the opportunity to dig deep into like the written feedback to see and analyze where we had some disagreement with why it shouldn't be a priority, but we're going to dig into that over the next couple of weeks. When it came to goal 1, outlining how realistic it was, you can also see that we had a great majority say that this goal is somewhat realistic. I think with this one, because this intrigued me a bit as to see like why we had the 47% saying that it was realistic. As I looked into it, it was clear to me that we really need to truly explain what we mean by opportunity gap, and we need to really beef up our supporting documentation that we include with the strategic plan. So we just kind of be a little bit more clear as we move forward. The goal 2, when it came to if it should be a priority for the board, as you can see, once again, the majority of the responses reflect that it should be a priority for the board. And when it came to being realistic, we're still getting the indication that we are on the correct path. Now, goal 3, I think I'm most excited about, and this supports much of what was stated in the earlier conversation around educator preparedness. Teachers are hungry. We have to get out there and we have to prepare them. And much to the point that was made, we have to equip the teachers to do this work, and that's a large part of our responsibility so that our students can be successful. So we have a lot of support with this goal, and we're just going to have to be intentional about the activities that we create to ensure that this happens. And then overall, I think that this graph depicts that we are truly on the right path. I think the piece that is overwhelmingly, as I looked at the written feedback a little bit, we need to ensure that we have dedicated financial resources to ensure that we can follow through on most of the work that we put out there. So our next steps include having that strategic planning committee call, sending out this final strategic plan for committee review and potentially full board review before the July 11th meeting. This has been a great and a rewarding experience to engage in. I've enjoyed engaging with board members in this way, staff. I've enjoyed engaging with them. I enjoyed engaging with shareholders across the state. I am open to any questions that you may have at this time, but that is the broad overview of the feedback that we received, which we promised you last month.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. Dr. Oxendine, I believe you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. My question is, oh my goodness, this might be, I need to know, when I see the title or the term equity and whole child, maybe it's just Olivia, but I need a little bit more clarity around that. I think it would help us, because I'm thinking, is it equity around the whole child and what the whole child means? Is it equity across the K-12 spectrum, really targeting what happens in the schools and classroom? Is it something else?
I think I'm going to defer to Mr. Ford, who leads this committee, to
Oh, I'm
answer.
sorry. I should have asked
That's
you.
fine. No, you did exactly what you're supposed to do. It's better than whispering in my ear, right?
I'll write you a note, like, what does this mean?
Right. So I think, and again, I feel like all of these conversations over the past couple meetings, whether it be some of the other presenters we've had come in, you've heard the constant refrain that equity is in everything. And I've actually heard Dr. Trice say, one time or another that wherever inequity exists, right, that's where this work is engaged. So the question, the simple answer is, it's all of the things that you just said, right? So everything from what takes place with the teachers, what takes place with the students, even in the way that we focus on social and emotional supports, that's done through the lens of equity. And so ultimately, it's about being just in the distribution and being fair and equalizing opportunities for young people. But I guess the best and most concise way to respond to that is that it's throughout, it's permeated, so that it's not an Equity Tuesday. I'm going to be stealing that phrase, right? But it's something that is foundational to everything that we do as a system, as a public school system. Does that help? But I do think, as a caveat, I think it would be beneficial, and you let me know if I'm wrong, if we put definitions for these words at the front of whatever plan it is, so that whoever is reading, it's qualified from the outset to alleviate any confusion. Would that be?
I'm so glad that you're sitting to my left, because I'll keep asking you the question. It gives me the impression that, I don't want to say this and be misunderstood, that we were trying to pull two major initiatives that we've tackled over the last several years. Now it's equity. Last year, 2 years ago, it was whole child. So we've got to marry them in some way. Because in my mind, when I see that, I think equity around the whole child. Now, I understand exactly what you were saying, and you were right about multiple definitions, many perspectives. It means many things. I get that. But at the same time, we've got to merge, in my mind, we need to merge, and this would take us further in our strategic plan, the concept of whole child inequity. Sorry if I'm not clear. I'm struggling.
That's why.
To your point, both initiatives carry tremendous weight in the impact that it could make on students and teachers across our state. And so, and I hate to use this word for fear that it might be misunderstood, but I'm looking at the logo on slide number 7, and if this is the logo that would be replicated across our state, or that would be an image that represents our state, we almost need to consider it as a brand, and maybe more informative language that might better represent the intent of the efforts behind the equity piece and the whole child. I'm not suggesting an advertising campaign, but I am suggesting perhaps blended language which might adequately describe the intent. Would someone in Arkansas, or would someone in the state of Washington understand if they just saw this logo?
I think it's a fair question, and I want to honor that. So you let me know if I'm hearing the right things, and you as well. It feels to you as if these concepts of equity and whole child are compartmentalized, and frankly, from your perspective, the visual representation doesn't indicate a marriage of the two concepts?
I say that.
So on the one hand, I hear like a visual, frankly, a design, right? Like a design concept, right? As somebody develops a mental model, this doesn't get to the heart, at least the way it's set now, doesn't get to the heart of how these things are together, right? And then I hear a separate piece of clarification around language, around what these terms mean. Is it accessible to the lay person? I want to make sure I'm getting that correct, yeah?
I think that's much more eloquently stated than I tried to, so.
Okay.
Yes. Mental model, yes, and the blending of the two significant initiatives as we try to improve all these three tenets: opportunity gaps, educator preparedness, and school and district performance.
Dr. Oxenden?
There's, to me, the term equity and the whole child have separate meanings. I think the challenge would be to Okay, the challenge would be to send out a coherent message about the concept that we're promoting.
Almost a statement that illustrates what we're seeing cohesively, right? So it can't just be a picture, but also a statement of how these things are intertwined in a relationship. Okay. Mr. Buxton?
I just want to check my understanding of how they're being used, given this
Absolutely.
good conversation. I mean, it's helping me. If we weren't doing it in a design phase, but you were just reading something, we would have a vision for all students in North Carolina.
Right.
As a board, we'd have a mission we'd take on to achieve that vision. Equity and whole child would be the values that we use to guide or undergird our work. And then the big strategic objectives we're lasered in on are the 3 goals. So the way we do our work is guided by equity and the whole child approach. And the focus of our work are these 3 goals, and then we measure them with the. That's how it's, I agree, I think the picture doesn't quite get you there, but that's how, given our conversation over the last few months, how I think about the goal.
I personally think that's an accurate statement. Now my mind immediately goes to how do you illustrate that? I was never good at graphic organizers in the classroom. That was never my strong
Sorry,
suit.
you're a social studies teacher, man.
Right.
You were in design. We're not holding you to that standard.
But I think that what you just stated, I think is accurate, that these are core values, right? They're central. And in that way, they're constantly overlapping, right? But it informs every aspect of what we're doing specific to these 3 goals, though. I defer to my vice chair as well. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to chime in if you so choose.
No, I think we have used the word values when we talked about equity and whole child, and the desire is to have those 2 things infuse the decisions that we make and the actions that we take. And I go back to something that that Wake, that equity work, their aim is for equity work to be routine and natural to everyone, and I think that's where the value comes in. I mean, you have to teach the value, but at some point, it just becomes a touchstone. Just like all of us have our own personal set of values, we would hope that that was where you go to when you're saying, is this right? Is this what I want to do? You go to your values. That's what we would like to see.
So Mr. McKinney just passed me a note, but we already determined that that's not how we do things. So I'm going to offer him, if he so chooses, the opportunity to share.
He's got a lot of notes down there.
It said, man, stop so I can get lunch.
I was just trying to put into words kind of what you were discussing, Dr. Oxendine. So, closing opportunity gaps for the whole child with a just, equitable education through an educator culture transformation. So you're trying to kind of hit all those points.
Sounds like a dissertation.
Pass that down. Pass that down.
I think you need to turn that in for the record-keeping purposes.
Thank you, though. That's good. We're getting there.
So I think that, and I want to make sure, did you have anything else, Dr.
No,
Oxendine? Okay.
Not now.
This is precisely the sort of conversation we need to be having, I think, at this stage. We want to, as we approach July, have something that we all feel comfortable on, that we feel like both makes us have a level of confidence in what we're doing, but also to make sure that, our shareholders, right, who are across the state, that they feel like this is accessible, a plan that they can have confidence in as well. And the notion of making sure that it spatially and visually makes sense mentally, and also a cohesive statement that helps illuminate that, I think is absolutely fair and only makes us better. So with that, I think that concludes my portion of time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. And we would like to invite any comments or input from our staff. Send us a note. Send us what you're thinking. Send us your scribbled, Freebird note. We would love your insight. And I'll just say, for one board member's opinion, what I like about this is, for me, the term whole child means for every individual child, we're going to focus on every aspect of their being. And the equity part is we're gonna take that to every child all across our state. That's, I don't know, for me, that's how the two come together. It's each individual child and every child.
Every part of every child, right?
Every part of every child, yeah. Great. Well, that's terrific. I'm glad we went ahead and did that before lunch, but now we'll break for lunch. So let's plan to get back together at 1:30. All right, 1:30.
Need another line.
Part of the question with this whole strategic plan is, we have got to have expectation for the LAs, but we've got to do it in a way that it's not us forcing it.
Yeah, very good.
But
Just can't get
recognize.
Hey, I was gonna hug you. How are you? How are you?
How do you like it? They need, there's another.
Here.
No, I think that's very helpful conversation about how you marry the concepts.
Heather, you're finishing up. Patience.
I don't know why it was on TV. I don't know why.
Okay.
Did you get it?
I'm here to check it just because you said.
Okay, but did you see I sent it like on time? I don't want you to get mad at me.